Just like we used a separate object to encapsulate data source responsibility for the album list controller, we're going to do the same with the album detail controller. You may be annoyed with me now, but as long as you create small objects, that's a worthy price to pay for all this repetition. So let's create a new file named album detail data source in the data sources folder. And this is a Swift file as always. Album detail data source. Now, at this point, this is data source number 3 or data source object number 3. So I'm going to assume you know all the details and just speed through. So this is a class album detail data source. It inherits from as object, you should know why, and conforms to UI table view data source. And I'm going to need to import UIKit for that. A data source always needs data, so private let songs, and this is an array of song. And we'll initialize this class with the data source that we are going to use. Self.songs equals songs. Now, before we add the data source methods, let's go ahead and create the custom subclass for the song cell. We're storing those in the views folder, so let's go and add a new file. This is a Cocoa Touch class. It is a subclass of UI table view cell, and we'll call this song cell. Now, in our storyboard scene, we need to go ahead and notify the scene of the underlying class. So zoom. I'm going to click the prototype cell, go to the identity inspector, and under class, specify song cell. In doing so, now we can create the relevant outlets because Interface Builder knows about the file. So we'll switch to the assistant editor, and I always have problems trying to get the right file to show. So you might, just like I do, have to navigate using the manual section. So views, song cell. First off in here, I'm going to add a static property to keep track of our reuse identifier. And remember, this is song cell. There's not a lot in terms of outlets here, so this is easy. Control drag from the song name. Okay, why aren't you responding? So I did not assign the underlying class properly. I did. Okay, there we go. So this is called the song title label. And I'm going to drag from the document outline here so it's easier to grab. And I'll call this the song runtime label. And that's all there is to this cell. So now, remember, we are always using view models to go from data to view model to cell. So in the view models group, new file. I wasn't lying when I said I'm going to speed through this. It's a Swift file. I'll call this the song view model. You know, if you don't want to type out all this, you can just skip ahead to the end of the video and grab the download from the project download section and just copy paste this all in. So this struct is going to be called the song view model. And we need to display a title as a string because it's a label, and a runtime, which we'll need to format properly. As always, we're going to do it in an extension so that we don't mess with the default member-wise initializer. And that allows me to inject data kind of whenever I need. We'll initialize this object with a song. And the title is simple. So we'll say self.title equals song.censored name. Now, the track time from the data object that we get from the web is going to be in milliseconds. So we need to convert that over into the right format. We'll first get the time in seconds by dividing the song's track time by 1,000. Now a bit of math. To get the minutes, we'll do time in seconds divided by 60, and then we'll use the modular operator to round that off to the nearest multiple. So you can test this in a playground to see that it works. Next, we'll get the seconds, and that's just time in seconds modulo 60. Now that we have this, we can say self.runtime equal minutes, seconds. Now, there are much better ways to do this using datetime formatter objects. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to display time in minutes and seconds. However, it's formatted depending on your locale. So different places display time differently. And those objects allow you far greater control. But we're going to keep it simple. Now, back in the album detail data source, we can add the data source methods. So first, we'll say number of sections will return 1. For number of rows in section, we'll return the song's count property. And for the last one, table view self a row at index path. First, we need a cell, and we'll want to use a prototype to make a reusable cell. So we'll say tableview.dequeue reusable cell with identifier. And that's a stored property, a static stored property on our class. So we can say song cell.reuse identifier, and then pass the index path through. We still want to cast it to the right type, though, so that we can use the outlets. I'm going to go ahead and return the cell. And then in here, we'll say let song. We need to grab the correct song from the data source, and we'll just songs index path.row. And then we'll create a view model out of this. So song view model, and that takes a song. We'll pass this through. And then finally, we can say cell.songTitleLabel.text equal viewModel.title, cell.songRuntimeLabel.text equal viewModel.runtime. Now, you know that because we've done this in past few videos, you can simply create a configure method in the cell that takes a view model and just handle all the logic there. Okay, so now our data source is set up. To get all of this up and running, we just need to hook up the data source to the detail controller. And we'll do that just like we did with the list controller, in that we'll create a lazy stored property, data source of type album detail data source. That takes a closure. And that allows us to refer to a stored property of this class because we're essentially deferring initialization of this property. So album detail data source, initialize that with songs, and we'll say self.album.songs. We have an error here, and that should go away in a second. There we go. If you run the app now and navigate all the way to the detail view using our stub data, which we added in the previous video, it should work just as expected. So search iTunes, fake data. I'm going to select the first album, and nope, that did not work. And that is because in viewDidLoad, I forgot to tell the table view about the data source. So tableview.dataSource equal data source. Let's run this again. So now, hey, look at that. We have songs in our detail controller. I want to make one small change though. I don't like how the rows are stuck to the bottom of the header view. But that's an easy fix, and we can do that by adding a title to the table view section. When we learned about table views, we learned that not only could a table view have a header and a footer, but each section inside a table view could also have its own header and footer. The purpose of a section header is to provide more information about what that section contains. So let's do just that. We'll say mark delegate or table view delegate. And here we're going to implement the method title for header in section. Now this returns an optional string depending on the section that you want to display a title for. So we'll switch on the section, and that's an argument in this method. And in the case of the first section, 0, we'll return tracks. For the default, we'll go ahead and return nil. Let's run this now. If we go all the way to the end, we basically have a full-fledged app. Now, why is this not working? Because I think I disconnected the delegate again. Simple mistake. Let's say tableview.delegate equals self, and see what that does. Let's run it. That still does not work. Why? Let's go to main.storyboard. And it looks like we have the right delegate selected. So it says here that the controller is acting as a delegate for the embedded table view. Okay, so I figured out my mistake. This is not a delegate method. This is a data source method. So let's copy this, get rid of it. Remember that we have a separate data source, so we need to implement it there. So we'll go over to album detail data source, paste it in, and now it should look much better. Search iTunes, Taylor Swift, second album. Look at that, much nicer. Now, I do realize that the last few videos were quite long, and honestly, thanks for sticking with me so far. We finally have all the UI up and good to go, and at this point, with the amount of repetition that we've done, you probably won't ever forget this. Now, let's move on to some of the more challenging aspects of this app, and that's the networking code.